Thank you for joining us at the Raisina Dialogue once again, and I'm Mihir Sharma, and I'm very happy to have with us today the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, Arancha González Laya, and who's had a long and distinguished career in multilateral institutions, including as Assistant Secretary General and Head of the International Trade Center. Minister, thank you once again for joining us. And I'd like to ask you, if I may, first a question about the sort of broader strategy that Spain sees for its foreign policy going forward. As you know, the Raisina Dialogue looks in particular at the space that the Indo-Pacific occupies in world affairs and the broader strategic shifts that affect it. The past few years have been one of emergence for Europe in the Indo-Pacific. Several major EU countries, including Germany and the Netherlands, have produced specific Indo-Pacific strategies. So over the past year, you yourself have undertaken a remarkable exercise of producing a new and systematic foreign policy strategy for Spain. Now, I understand, of course, that areas like North Africa or Latin America are of more immediate importance, but where does the Indo-Pacific fit in to your strategy for Spain?
Well, let me first thank you for this opportunity to join the Raisina Dialogue and to do this with India, a country that is a continent, a country that Spain respects, that Spain admires. We have a lot in common, and with whom we want to establish a more strategic relationship. And this is maybe the beginning of this conversation. We've just had a review of Spain's foreign policy. It's a good moment to do this, as the world is going through a period of geopolitical turmoil. As we see tensions on the economy, we see tensions also on democracies and on our society, as we see tensions on security and defense, tensions also driven by an increase in terrorist forces around the world. It's a good moment to rethink how we deal with these challenges. From Spain's point of view, we deal with these challenges much better if we do this together. And this is why our foreign policy puts multilateralism, international cooperation at the heart of our foreign policy. We know that unilateralism, we know that individual actions by individual countries, powerful as they may be, are not sufficient to respond to what our citizens are asking us, which is more security, greater protection, more shared prosperity. We need a bigger drive towards international cooperation. This is the heart of Spain's foreign policy. So from this point of view, obviously, Spain has very specific relations with specific parts of the world, be it Latin America, with whom we share history, be it with our neighbors, the southern neighborhood of the European Union, be it with the African continent, our next door neighbors, with whom we share also proximity and incredible close ties. But we don't want to stop there. We also think that Spain needs to look much closer at the Indo-Pacific region, a region of incredible progress, human progress, of economic drive, but also of geopolitical tensions. We want to be much more present in the Indo-Pacific region, working with all countries. We see this as an open relationship, but also defending our interests, but also being very clear of our values. And this is maybe where I would put the stress. Spain's foreign policy is very interested at promoting Spain's interest around the world, including in the Indo-Pacific region, but it's very clear also that its interests have to be based on shared values. We value democracy, which is the bedrock of our society. We value respect for human rights, respect for individual freedoms, respect for women's rights. So this is how we see, in a nutshell, the for our foreign policy, much more multilateral, with a greater drive at international cooperation, with specific relationships with specific parts of the world, and in a combination of interests and values, never forgetting the values that at the end of the day have to be also the basis of our advancing our interests.
Thank you, Minister. So that explanation feeds in quite nicely into some of my next questions. And the first one is about climate and multilateralism and the climate, essentially. This coming Conference of Parties, this COP in Glasgow this year, we are told maybe a COP that focuses on climate finance. You yourself have promised to scale up Spain's overseas development assistance. And you in your career have done sterling work on what a greener trade system would look like. But what are your ideas about using multilateralism to get private finance into the infrastructure and climate gain? What can be done multilaterally? What can be done by Europe?
Well, first to tell you that this is one of the areas where the interests of Spain, Europe, and India intersect very strongly. And this is where I hope that the EU-India leaders gathering that will take place in May in Portugal under the Portuguese presidency of the European Union will focus a lot of attention. Because at the end of the day, we only have one planet. And we need to make sure that life in this planet is going to be possible for the future generations, not just for the current generations. And this is where we need, together, in a multilateral effort, on which both India and Europe, and for that Spain, can work together to instill ambition in terms of decarbonizing our economies. A big part of this has to do with our energy systems. We need to decarbonize our energy systems, and I want to praise here the efforts of India giving a very big impulse to the Solar Alliance. We need to do this with renewables on solar, on wind, on hydro, also new sources of renewable energy like green hydrogen, on which Spain has just adopted a very ambitious strategy. So I would say that the first thing we need is to signal at the COP in Glasgow that we want ambition, because without this ambition, we are not going to guarantee the planet for our future generations. The second thing I would say is that this ambition needs to be driven together by governments, but also by the private sector. The example of the Solar Alliance in India is a very good example of this. Governments signal by means of policies, they signal by means of instruments, financial instruments, legislations. We just adopted our own climate change law. It's a good way to signal to the public sector, but also to the private sector, how we intend to drive concretely this ambition. And then it requires the private sector to, in a way, receive those signals that the public sector is sending and transform them into private economic activities. This obviously requires a financial context with financing, with green financing that is also making financing more available at better conditions for those private sector, for those business activities that go in the direction of supporting the decarbonization, with better conditions for the companies that have understood that you can do business and contribute to sustainability at the same time. This is why we are supporting the more actions and more decisive actions by multilateral development banks in the direction of green financing. This is where we ourselves, in our own financing for development, will be introducing in the reforms that we are at the moment crafting better also better terms and conditions for green financing. So in a nutshell, if I may, ambition on the side of governments at the COP at the end of this year, signals by the government with legislation, with policies, and with financing that translate those political ambitions, and a good public-private partnerships with working together with the private sector, whether it's to advance green hydrogen, whether it is to advance solar renewable energy, whether it is to advance the electric vehicle of the future, whether it is to decarbonize by improving the energy standards of buildings that in a continent like Europe is responsible for 1/3 of the emissions. So the solutions are there. What we need is good signals on the side of governments and businesses that understand that at the end of the day, they will be more competitive also if they are more sustainable.
Thank you, Minister. And moving from climate maybe to something that you have a great deal of experience with, which is the multilateral trading system. Coming to trade proper, the pandemic, other recent global developments have put the focus on examining existing trade arrangements, supply chains, and so on and so forth. And many people in many parts of the world are concerned, for example, about forced labor in the supply chain. Other people are concerned about maybe strategic dependence on single sources for vital supplies. And how is trade multilateralism going to respond? Is there reform? These are new questions, and we haven't got a good answer for them.
First, I would say that we have seen from Spain, international trade is extremely important. Is a big part of our growth, is a big part of our value added in the country, is a big part of our jobs. And when we say this, we know this is also true for other countries around the world. This is certainly the case true for India. And this is where, in my view, India and Europe have an opportunity now, working together with many other partners, to reform the multilateral trading system. We have a strong set of international rules that help make sure that open trade works for sustainable development and for job creation and for the development of our nations. This is what the preamble of the agreement that created the World Trade Organization says. International trade, open trade, rules-based international trade is good, can be made to work for sustainability, for jobs, employment, and for the eradication of poverty. Now, it's true that the World Trade Organization that was last reformed dates from 1995. This was a world that was a little bit different from the world today. It's a world where services were a smaller part of our economies. It's a world where digitalization did not exist or was very nascent. It's a world where concerns regarding labor conditions or respect for human rights was maybe not as prevalent in our societies as is today. And it's a world where sustainability concerns were not as important to our societies as they were in 1995. So we've got an opportunity now to work to reform the international trade system, the set of international rules that guarantee that international trade will be conducted in an open manner and that countries will be able to protect themselves without exercising trade protectionism, that, as we all know, does not protect jobs. And this is what the rules of the game in the international trading system guarantee. Protect jobs, but not through trade protectionism. Now, what we now have ahead of us is an opportunity to reform the international trading system. We have a new leader in the World Trade Organization. For the first time is an African leader, for the first time also a female leader, and we've got with the sensitivity that she will bring also from where she comes from, but also with our strong credentials for open markets, I think we've got a very good opportunity to give an impulse to the reform of the World Trade Organization. And I do think that India, as a founding member of this organization, and with the big, and I know this for a fact, given that I've spent parts of my life also at the World Trade Organization, with the big contribution that India has always made in international trade. I think it has an opportunity working with Europe, working with other partners around the world to adjust the system that has served us well, but right now requires a reform. We have an opportunity to do this now. Let's seize the opportunity and let's make sure that we turn, in a way, our back to maybe what we've seen in more recent years of unilateral practices and protectionist practices that, frankly, have not helped us in changing the system, adjusting it to the future and adjusting it for the good.
In some sense, Minister, I had another question, but I wanted to just follow up with that. The vaccine story has been something that I think a lot of us have been thinking about recently, that countries that were exporting, whether European Union or India, began to feel pressure from their own citizens at being essentially the only good citizens in the trading system when other countries maybe were not exporting or put into place export bans. And there's no way to, in the end, enforce a trading system that depends upon everyone being on their best behavior. Do you feel that this has somehow disillusioned some people about the strength of trading ties, even between long-term allies?
Well, first, let me tell you that exiting this crisis will require that every citizen gets an access to a vaccine. This is fundamental for all of us. If we don't exit this crisis, all of us together, we will all be at risk. This is where, again, international cooperation is the name of the game to exit the crisis that the pandemic has thrown us into. Now, vaccines today require an urgent drive to increase production. The problem we have today is that in less than 1 year, we have discovered several vaccines, but we do not have the capacity to produce them. So the bottleneck today, and this is where urgent efforts are necessary, and this is where I commend the efforts of the World Trade Organization to also drive international cooperation to this space, is produce more, produce faster. And this will require governments working together with the private sector, governments working together with pharmaceutical companies to look at where are their bottlenecks and remedy this in the short term. Now, we also need maybe to have a more medium-term look at the rules that govern intellectual property rights. We need to look at how maybe we use the flexibilities that the rules have today. The rules of the World Trade Organization allow for technology transfers. They allow for waiving patents when one is confronting with pandemics like the one we are confronting today. Maybe we have to look at these flexibilities that exist and exploit them fully. Also medium to long term, because fighting this pandemic will not end this year. This is a longer term fight we need to confront, and looking at the rules that exist today and maximizing the flexibilities that exist within these rules in a coordinated manner will be, in my view, of the essence to fight this pandemic, but to prepare better for the future pandemics. Thank you,
Minister. And for my last question, I want to follow up on what you said about Europe and Spain and values. And, that's always what many of us here in the Indo-Pacific have thought. The European Union is not like, not just a trading community, it's also got a values at its heart. But in recent times, I think it's fair to say that for those of us on the outside, it's looked that Europe has faced both questions internally and externally about shared values, whether it's rule of law internally or externally. Where does investment with China fit in? Where do relations with Russia fit in? Do you have thoughts on how these these contradictions are going to be resolved?
Well, I think it's fair to say that any conversation about values has to start with humbleness. No one has the perfect recipe to defend values, and no one is perfect with regards to upholding its values. But what I would say is that at least humbleness has to be combined also with determination. This is how we see it in Spain. We are conscious that we are imperfect in defending or in respecting values. We know that we've got a way to go. We know that we have to make our democracy more resilient, but we are also very determined to do so. So this is, in a way, how we want to approach this question of values. In Europe, where we need to continue to improve respect for the values that are the bedrock of the European Union, is Article 1 of the Treaty of the European Union, freedoms, rights, democracy, human rights. This is the bedrock of our system, the rule of law, and we will continue to invest in making it stronger in Europe. And because we want to do this in Europe, we also want to be able to share the same spirit with friends, partners, and allies around the world. So the rest of the world should see Europe not as wanting to impose its values on others, but as a continent that takes values that are universal values seriously and wants to seriously engage in a conversation with all its partners, whether it's with India, whether it's with China, whether it's with Russia, from the humbleness of understanding that we are not perfect, but also from the determination that we want to take seriously this issue in Europe and in our relations with third countries. This is how we see it in Spain. We need to take it seriously because at the end of the day, it's also the undertaking we have with all our people. It's also the very basic tenet that we've agreed to respect in the United Nations.
Thank you, Minister. I think that is an inspiring ending, and I think that's where we will leave it. And thank you for joining us at the Raisina Dialogue, and I hope all of you watching enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for this opportunity.